welcome to this special session specifically designed for those of you who are leading our Reboot First Responder course. This course actually was the second, if you look at the way that the organization grew, this was the second course to come out as our organization began to expand. And it's been incredible to see the number of people that it served. However, it's maybe not quite as straightforward as leading some of our other courses are, because first responders represent such a broad and diverse group of people. Even the definitions of what is a first responder is very broad, and I would suggest maybe even continually broadening, right? And so we're going to talk about how do you as a leader make sure that your first responder group is a success. To help me with that, I've brought in one of our longtime leaders. He's actually been the former board chair of our organization, if you can believe that, and he's going to share a little bit about himself. But Scott McPherson is here with us today. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Evan.
Yeah, and he also has a good deep radio voice, and so I just want to say that this whole conversation, I feel like a teenager. And I am basically a teenager because I'm so youthful.
Yes, I have a face that was made for radio. Thanks, Evan. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. My name is Scott McPherson. I first met Evan when we were approaching the issue of recovery from combat trauma. I'm a combat veteran, was with the 82nd Airborne Division during Operation Desert Storm. And as we transitioned into the first responder world, really found a niche. I'm also a volunteer firefighter for a department in a suburb of Nashville, and the EMT as well. So have a foot in several different worlds in the first responder world, and have led, this will be my fourth rotation so far in the first responder course.
And everything we're going to share with you today, this is not information that we're sharing that like we read out of some book or that's a good idea. This is School of Hard Knocks knowledge that we're going to share with you, things that we had to learn the hard way. And we're hoping that we can save you some of the pain that we've had to go through. And then one of the first big pain points, one of the things that I think everybody wants to know about is, how do I reach them? How do I do outreach to these communities? Because it is challenging. There's all kinds of issues. And so what are some of the things that you found effective? And we can kind of go around on this for a little bit, and you can take notes as you kind of go through this process. What are some of the outreach that are specific strategies you found working with first responders?
Yeah, you're right, Evan. This is a difficult set of communities, not just one community, but a set of communities to reach. So it can take several different angles, but as a summary statement, the way I like to think about it is to do everything that you can do and then let God do what only He can do.
Good.
So when it comes to breaking that down, what we can do, I think one of the things that I would start off with, and what I started off with when I ran my first course rotation, was to start looking at who are some of the influencers in the various communities that you want to reach. So that may be different people within the EMS world, different people within law enforcement, different people within the fire service. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the other communities that sometimes people don't think about, like 911 dispatchers, like the corrections community, like those who serve in the medical field. And so there's different points of contact that you may find in each one of those different communities. So perhaps start off making a list of who these people are. I then encourage you to come up with an elevator speech, is what I call it. So if you're trapped on an elevator with somebody and you've got 10 floors that you've got their attention because they can't get away from you, then be able to present what Reboot is, what it is and means to you in a very short manner, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, so that it's direct, but it gives them enough of an interest so that they're willing to talk with you further about it. Also, one of the things I found very helpful was to develop a leave behind piece. It can be just a PDF, it can be something that just talks briefly about what Reboot is, and have that as something that you can either email or that you can leave behind. Once you've got that territory covered, then you can start reaching out to some of these people and just ask for some of their time to give them an introduction to what Reboot is. And then hopefully they'll be able to give you 10, 15 minutes. So you've already got your elevator speech ready. You're ready to give them that initial something that is of interest to them. And what I've found is that most people in leadership or influential positions are quite willing to talk.
Absolutely.
And give you at least that. And oftentimes what you find is that they recognize that there's a need in their line of service, but they haven't really found the way to be able to address it yet. And so hopefully they will give you that first step in the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just piggybacking on that, we talked about this in your primary outreach session that was part of the Leadership Academy. But sometimes an influencer isn't even necessarily a person with a certain rank. Sometimes the biggest influencer on the culture of a department is a person who's just a sergeant, or they're some rank up or down the food chain, if you will. Sometimes they're just a person who's looked to because maybe they're the toughest in the group. Maybe they're the strongest in the group. And if you can reach that person, and one of the things that I've seen really effective as part of and you heard Scott do this at the beginning partially, I found it really effective when doing outreach to also share your why, share your story, right? So you heard him say, Desert Storm, I also did this. What he didn't get into obviously yet in this particular video is the why he got it, or why he wants to be a part of it. But I think that's an effective thing because that's going to touch their heart a little bit, and it's going to take it out of sort of this, well, this is just another program that's out trying to get people, yada, yada. It's going to break that a little bit and cut right to the quick of why you're actually there. When people know why you care, they'll then want to know what you care about, okay? And that's an important part to this. What's another way to do some specific outreach strategies?
Well, the other thing that I was going to mention in all of this is there's going to be some other things that are going on behind the scenes, some Facebook marketing, perhaps some other kinds of things that the Reboot headquarters is going to do to help support your efforts. But yours is the main effort in terms of getting the word out in the community. And then I would encourage you to also have a time every day, every week of prayer about getting this group together. Because ultimately, it's going to be God who has the people who He wants in your group who are going to be there. And whether that's 2 or 5 or 10, that doesn't have the most impact on the success of the group. It's that God has the people that He wants there, and that you have an opportunity now to speak into their hearts and to address some of the issues that they've encountered. And what traditionally has happened through the Reboot groups that we've seen over the years is that it's that 2 becomes 6, becomes 12, becomes 8. It just exponentially grows from there as that word of mouth spreads. It may not happen as fast as you might want it to happen, but if you just have a couple of people that are in that group, it can be extremely successful and can have a massive impact over time.
Because it multiplies.
It does.
It does. And word gets around quickly about a program that's actually working where people actually care. I think that's a unique thing. And I think it's unique. You as a leader have something unique to offer, which is you're there for no other reason than the fact that you love these people. You're not there because you were ordered to be there. You're not there because you got paid. You're not there because they filed an insurance claim. You're not there because it's a mandatory briefing. You're there simply because you love them. And that's valuable, that's important, that's gold in terms of building relationships. Sometimes you also might be asked to speak or to present about the organization at a briefing or at some type of booth or town hall type event. We will equip you. So he mentioned the one-page kind of executive summary about us. We give you that as part of your My Reboot Leader resources. We also give you a stock sort of standard PDF presentation that you can click through on slides. We give you all of those materials, so use those when you get up. Don't feel like you need to create something from scratch. These are visually stunning, but they're also dynamic in terms of communicating efficiently what it is that we do. If you are asked to speak, don't forget you should have a leadership team. You should have an outreach coordinator on your team. You should have some other people that you want to bring with you. Because what might happen is you might find that after you get done speaking, nobody comes up and talks to you and it's silent, and then a few days later people reach out, or you might find that immediately afterwards there's a line of people wanting to talk to you, in which case you're going to wish you had a few other team members there to be able to help to address those real-time issues. Right? Those are just a few things. Anything else we want to mention on outreach before we move on?
I was just going to say that I found it amazing to see the people who actually come to the group. You may not have any idea how they found out about you. Mm-hmm. You've done all of this work, but you may not understand where that connection came from that actually led them to register for the course and to show up for the first day. So it's incredible. It's an opportunity to see God at work, and it's just incredible to see.
Yeah, and when you do talk to leadership positions, you're not necessarily asking for them to go out and do the research or the outreach for you. You're asking for access for you to be able to go do the outreach. You don't necessarily want a top-down briefing. Okay, hey, we got Reboot Recovery. If you're messed up in the head, go check them out. You don't want that kind of briefing coming from the top, right? You want access. And a lot of times I've found most departments are getting a lot more open to this kind of thing, and I hope that's your experience. I think when we're doing outreach, one of the challenges that I hear a lot is, oh, Evan, man, that sounds awesome. If it wasn't for my swing shift, I would be there. I mean, if it wasn't for my schedule, I would be there. And it's sort of this instinctual reaction that is their initial objection that I've had to learn how to kind of overcome. Yeah. And it's challenging, right? And so what are some of the things that we've done when it comes to swing shifts that have been effective?
Yeah. Shifts are just a reality of the first responder world. And even if it wasn't for that, you're still going to have times when people aren't able to make, you can't pick a day of the week and a time where people will always be able to be there. It just won't happen. So part of your preparation is starting to think about how you deal with that. And there's a number of different possibilities, and you've just got to find the fit that's right for you. So some of the ideas that you can think of is to first have a plan where, let's say that somebody isn't going to be able to make a session, and they let you know about that. Then we've got the access on the My Reboot portal to be able to go back in, to watch the videos, to look at some of the supplementary materials. It doesn't give them all of the group experience, but it at least keeps them up to date with where the course is. And each week builds on itself. So if they're missing a week, then they are missing quite a bit. And but it's something that you can have a plan for and be able to perhaps follow up with them during the course of that week to say, hey, what did you think? Here's some of the main points. Let's talk about that. How does that impact you? So it at least gives them some semblance that they were able to address that specific week's topic and continue to move forward so they don't feel like they can't come back because they missed a week. Some of the other possibilities that you could even consider having a Zoom connection, even if you're meeting in person, where you have that person on Zoom while they're on shift. I've had that happen quite often. I've actually led groups while I was on shift. So, that's
next level leadership. That's like 2.0 leadership right there.
You do what you got to do.
While he was on a call, he's like, sir, I'll be with you in a minute. Let me get to this point. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, and they may have to drop off. If the tones drop and they've got a call, they've got to go, they've got to go. There's nothing you can do about that. But it could be the case that they're able to participate, even if they're only listening. They're getting the value of that conversation. So if they can find someplace quiet where they're not going to be interrupted, exactly. There's no reason why somebody can't still participate even while they're on shift. And then another option that you can consider, especially if you're doing one of the virtual courses, is to ask for everyone's permission week one to record the Zoom session. And if that is okay with everybody, then that Zoom at the end of the meeting will send you a copy of that you can then send to them, and they can watch that during the week. Once again, they're not getting the benefit of interacting, but at least they're keeping up with the material as they go through it.
Yeah, and we've seen this in the first responder. We have groups, most of them meet in person, but there are some that meet fully online, especially if they've got people spread around the country. And then there's some groups that also have a person online. If they don't feel comfortable on video or they're not able to, the other thing that we have done, Jenny and I, over the years, we've asked for permission to just audio record, just using your cell phone. Just open that voice memo app or whatever you have and just audio record that, and you can share that. You can even text that to a person after and say, hey, missed you tonight. But again, something that he said that I want to repeat, make sure to ask permission from everyone in the group and say, hey, Dave couldn't be with us tonight, Cheryl couldn't be with us tonight. Will it be okay if I record tonight's session and share that with him? You want to get permission about that. So let's talk about, I'm going to jump down to who should I reach out to first. Let me jump down to that one. Where do we start? We talked about influencers, but okay, great. I don't know that many people in the town, or I've been retired a few years. Where do I start?
Yeah, well, there's any number of different answers to that, and I guess general categories that you might think of. You came up with a list of the different categories of people who fit into that first responder role, and then you can start thinking about who some of the influencers are within those communities, and certainly can be leadership. I would definitely recommend going to them, at least telling them what this is all about, so if they start hearing about it, then they'll have an idea as to what's going on. And many times you're going to find that they're willing to give you 10 minutes at the start of a shift to be able to just give a brief overview of Reboot, or be able to, I've had them send out flyers before where they just kind of did a blanket email, and that elicited some information or some responses for some people. It could be chaplains who have a responsibility for ministering to the different lines of service. The other one that we're going to talk about in a minute, but that I think is really crucial, is thinking about the spouse. And that element of the community is one that's often overlooked, but we found is be absolutely crucial to getting people to come. It's not often the times the first responder that wants to come to this group. Yep. But the spouse may be the one who's at home, they're isolated, they're not part of a shift, they're not part of a team or a partnership. They're at home, they're seeing the impact of the trauma that the first responders experience, but may not know how to handle that, may not know how to address it. And sometimes you find that they're at the point where it's like, look, we're going to try something or I'm gone.
Right.
And
there's a threat, an imminent threat to something they care about. That's
absolutely.
Exactly right.
And you may have an opportunity in your course to see these relationships begin to heal, which is just an incredible opportunity. So that may be, maybe there's a spouses group that you can find some connection to within the community, maybe a law enforcement spouses or fire service, or and it may not be just all female. Don't think of it necessarily like that. There's also many men that are spouses of first responders. Right. You can also find couples that are first responders. And so that's just one more way to be able to have an inroad into that community, to be able to start conversations. And then once you get that first inroad, ask who else you should talk to. Because they know other people, and if you ask, they may very well tell you about 3 or 4 other people that you need to go talk to next that can continue to help you build your network.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Within our first responder and our military program, here's a little interesting data point for you. Over 50%, somewhere between 60 and 70%, depending on the time of year, of our registrants are actually not the military veteran or the first responder. They are a partner, a spouse, a caregiver, a close family member who's concerned. And so those first few weeks, there's this element of they're dragging them to this course saying, again, if something doesn't change, I'm going to leave, or something like that. And so recognize they're coming in with that. And so sometimes you might notice some disgruntledness by the course participant, especially the first responder, who might kind of grumble or, grunt. They're probably not mad at you. They're probably mad with the person that dragged them there, right? And it's just reflecting out on you, and kind of know that. And over the years, I think some of the most joyful opportunities that I've had, and you just alluded to this, is watching families tackle this together. Because when we talk about spouses, caregivers, partners, I think it's important, first off, you already talked about the inclusiveness of that, recognizing that a lot of the people who come, they may not be in a traditional marriage type of setup. We have a lot of people who come to our courses who are living together, or who, they're dating or whatever like that, and recognizing we have to recognize this is still an on-ramp to faith for them, right? Recognizing this is a place where we still want to love them and help them, but also recognizing that sometimes those people can be a really good sort of truth serum as well, to say, no. I know he or she's saying this, but here's what my experience is, right? And so those are some of the best things that we've had. And I want to talk about this idea of secondary trauma in a second. But before I get to that, I want to just talk a little bit about spouses. First off, he mentioned networking or doing outreach within communities of partners and spouses is a very good idea, and we have found it work remarkably well. This is a great time to empower your outreach kind of team to go out and do that. But another thing that sometimes happens is people will often say, well, I went to the course, but I really went, I hear wives a lot of times say, like, I went for him. I just went for him. And they'll find that they start getting something out of it, but they might ask during the course, well, what about a specific thing for me? What is there that's specific for me? And so a couple of the thoughts I want to highlight quickly there, and then I want to talk about secondary trauma, and if you have anything to add on this. One of the things that Brian actually does in his group is he and his wife, even during the curriculum, they will pause, and Jen, his wife, will stand up and they'll share what she calls the spouse perspective on that topic. And it's a specific little 5 to 7 minute window that specifically introduces or talks about it through that lens. That's a great solution. It's an easy solution, and it's something that you can do. What are some of the other ways that you've seen getting spouses involved? Any other ideas or things you've seen work?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I think as part of, once you're leading the course, as you're going through each week, just make a deliberate effort to include the spouses in the conversation, to ask for their perspective so that they have an opportunity to talk. You may not need to encourage them. They may go ahead and just tell you exactly what they're thinking, which is great. But if they're kind of standing in the background or feeling like, well, I don't really belong here because I'm not a first responder, that's a leadership challenge to be able to draw them out, to get them participating and encourage them to speak. Because many times they're seeing things and they're going to be a whole lot more open about what it is that they're seeing happen at home than the first responder themselves might, at least at first.
Yeah.
So that would be one thought.
No, I think, and it's, yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we've seen so often, and you will see this, I guarantee you will see this. We said in the earlier Leadership Academy in the main courses that Reboot exists first for the person who's experienced trauma, second for their caregiver, spouse, or partner, and third for anyone else. But how does that work with secondary trauma? How does that work when I'm a spouse or a partner of someone, and now I have my own trauma to deal with in addition to what the primary first responder has to deal with? How do I do that? As a teacher, how should I handle that? And the first thing I would say is treat the people as individuals and treat their trauma independently. So often I'll hear people who go through this course saying, I didn't realize how much stuff I hadn't ever dealt with. And I'll hear this from spouses very often. I didn't realize how much that person's career, his or her career, was impacting me. And so it's important to also say to them as you begin teaching, hey, don't just sit here and say, well, this is just for them. Ask yourself, okay, wait a minute, what parts of this can be for me? And that's a really important thing that we have seen so much when we get into that area of secondary trauma, right? Which is that contagious form of trauma, a trauma that I get by being around someone who is going through trauma often. It can rub off, it can spread, if you will, to me. And so a lot of times you'll experience that. Anything you wanted to add on secondary trauma, or did you want to kind of keep moving here? We got a billion topics. This video is only 6 hours long, so I hope you're in for that. Anything else?
Roll on.
Okay, good deal. So I think one of the things that I found difficult. So when we first began working on this curriculum, Chris and Ranella Atzett from our team wrote the majority of this curriculum, and I remember that early on in the book, there was this sentence that said, this course is great for, and it said law enforcement, fire service, EMS, and it was like, comma, correctional officers, comma, 911 operators, comma, children protective services workers, comma, psychologists who respond to crime scene units, comma, and it just kind of kept going. And I was like, my goodness, this is a very long list of professions. And I think that the language used to just be, unless you drove something that had a siren, you weren't considered a first responder. But I think that's starting to change. Have you seen that as well?
Yes, and I think that is an opportunity as well, because there's so many of these different communities that have experienced their own forms of trauma. So it's an opportunity to be able to look at what some of these different categories are, and I'll just to add some of the ones that I mentioned before that really are often overlooked, because you look at the corrections community. I mean, that's the corrections officers dealing with tremendously difficult issues. And
very high suicide rates.
And very high suicide rates. The medical profession. We're recording this during the COVID epidemic, and think about the critical care personnel and the ICU personnel and the emergency room personnel, who in normal circumstances would have tremendously difficult situations that they're having to deal with. But now you stack this pandemic on top of that, and they're going from one situation to the next one to the next one without any time to be able to process what they've just been through. So you can think about them as a community. That's a whole different group to look at for outreach. Now, the challenge that comes from that is that you may have people come to your group that represent each one of these various different communities, and their experiences are going to be different. The law enforcement officer is definitely going to be different from the critical care nurse. And the 911 dispatchers is definitely going to be different from the fire service personnel. Now, they may have operated on some of the same scenes at different stages, but their view of it, their experience from it, and their trauma that came from it may be vastly different.
Right.
So once you start to get a feel for who's in your group, start to develop a game plan as to how to talk to them and how to get them to express what they've experienced in a way that they feel comfortable and they feel included and they feel the ability to speak openly and honestly about what they've been through. And then, that's where we talk in the ground rules, week 1, about making sure that we don't try to one-up each other, or we say, well, you think that was bad, how about this?
Right.
And especially if you're not familiar with their line of service, you really don't have an appreciation for what they've been through.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the group can't work and it can't work well. It's just a leadership challenge, once again, to make sure that all of them feel included, all of them feel valued, and that their story is heard.
Yeah, and I think that's hard. I think it's hard when you've got, a 911 operator in the same room as a person who's a law enforcement officer that just responded to an accidental weapons discharge. Those are two scenarios that it would be tempting if I'm the law enforcement officer to say, yeah, you were on the phone, but I saw it in person. And it's a temptation, I think, to sort of, as the 911 operator, to maybe say, well, I don't want to share because I don't want to, steal from the healing that this person needs. And I always talk about that. Sometimes trauma victims believe that there's this bucket of healing that's available, but once it runs out, there's no more healing available. So I don't want to steal the healing that's meant for someone else. And it's no, that's not how it works. There's plenty of healing to go around, right? There's enough, and then there's still some left over afterwards, right? And I think that's a beautiful principle that's important. I also think that as we talk about these groups, there is one group that doesn't actually qualify in our mind most of the time, not always, but most of the time they don't qualify as a first responder, and yet they may play a really important role and may want to attend your course. And these are our friends who are professional counselors or psychologists. We also have had over the years many students who are earning their social work degree who asked to participate in the group. And we love these people. We partner with these people around the globe. And this is not criticizing, but too many social workers, too many psychologists, too many psychiatrists in one room with first responders will start to make it not feel very safe. And that's not because they will overshare. It's not because they do anything wrong. It's simply because when we go around and everybody introduces themselves, you don't want to have well, I'm a correctional officer, I'm a firefighter, well, I'm a student at social work, I'm a student at social work, I'm a clinical psychologist, You don't want to have more people who are there to observe than are there to seek help. And that's actually a risk that I know both of us have dealt with. We've had groups where we've had 4 or 5 people say, could I just come and observe? And you don't really want to create a zoo where people come and watch these animals in their natural habitat and say, isn't that interesting, and go back and write papers. That's not the culture we're trying to build. If you want to create a family, you don't want observers. So what I always do is I try to limit it to one person per group, one role of that kind, and I'll say to that person, hey, don't just observe. Be part of our leadership team. Use your education, use your skill, use your talent in this area, and or help us with hospitality, help us set up and tear down chairs, help us pray afterwards, help us do something. Be part of the family, be part of the leadership team, have a role. Don't just come and watch the mission in action and write about it, be a part of it. And inviting them, because sometimes they feel like, I don't want to step on toes, but invite them to be part of your team. Not only a lot of times will these people surprise you and they'll end up being these vital roles, but sometimes also they'll start to realize there was a part of the clinical side of things that maybe they were missing out. Maybe there was an emotional connection with quote unquote patients that maybe they had lost over the years because of doing clinical sort of distancing all these years. And sometimes it's rewarding for them to get their hands into the messy ministry again a little bit. Okay, so I don't want to beat that horse anymore, but that's an important thing. And again, please don't take any offense to it. We love these people. Yes, include them, but also just know you don't want to have more observers than you have people seeking help.
Can I just add in?
Please.
I've had this as well. You'll have people register that don't have an immediate connection to a first responder category. You find out that they're a counselor, psychologist, somebody who wants to be able to serve this community. And yes, we want them to be able to serve this community. But I think it's so crucial that we be careful with this. One of the things that I've encouraged them to do is to introduce themselves and why they're there to the group.
Great.
And I'll also have a conversation with them once I figure out, where they're coming from. I'll have a conversation with them ahead of time, just to say, look, this is for these first responders. We're glad that you want to serve this community, and you're trying to get some education as to some of the issues that they face. But be a part of the leadership team, but also be more of an observer in terms of not taking over the conversation and oversharing, right?
Yeah, and rarely you'll have someone who's not really there for an education or to learn or to serve. They're there to create leads for their private practice.
That can happen.
And you want to make sure this is not a sales opportunity for them. This is not, fishing in a stock pond, okay? So, and again, hopefully that didn't offend anybody watching. If you are a professional in any form, we love you, we appreciate you, we're for you. I want you to hear us say that. I think something else that is a little bit tricky, and we only have a couple other items here, so bear with us, but one is working within government entities is something that is really complicated. It's complicated not just because you're dealing with the fact that there is this separation, this element of I can't necessarily bring faith into the workplace, but also I have found that certain areas of the country will be really welcoming, and other areas of the country, if you bring up anything faith-based at all, it's an absolute hard no. It's a hard pass. And so the question is, how do we sort of do that? And this is something that hits close to home for me. The reason is because when Reboot first got started, we started in our living room, but our second ever meetings that happened were on an active duty military base. So here we were, two civilian people offering a trauma healing course for veterans that was faith-based on a military installation. That doesn't happen, just so you know, that doesn't happen. I think we might be the only story I've ever heard that does that. But why? What did we do that made it work? And I've got lots of advice on this, but Scott, I'll kick off to you first. What are some of the things that you've found work in terms of trying to infiltrate, if you will, some of these government entities?
Yeah, I would say to emphasize the inclusive nature of Reboot. We welcome people of all faith backgrounds, no faith background, and at the same time, we're straight up front with the people that we're talking to that this is a faith-based program, and we are going to be talking about Scripture. We are going to be talking about the life of Jesus, and that we're that's part of the core of the DNA of what Reboot is. But we also welcome people from all sorts of different perspectives and all sorts of different backgrounds. So that can be an important part to communicate. And that the evidence is shown in the surveys that we have done that the vast majority of people who come to Reboot groups feel like they're welcomed and feel like their perspectives are valued. So that you can show them some of the materials that actually demonstrate the numbers associated with those surveys. So that can be an important component of helping overcome that obstacle.
I love that idea, Scott, of taking in some of the medical research side, being able to be viewed as, yes, we're faith-based, but we also are measuring the same things that this clinical community is measuring, I think is really important, because what do you think that does psychologically to the person you're talking to? I mean, it changes the conversation a little bit, doesn't it?
It does help, and that's the purpose for doing a lot of the research, is to help change that conversation from one that may not feel very like it's got a scientific foundation to one where we can actually demonstrate results in the same kind of terminology that scientists would use, and so that's a very valuable tool to be able to approach some of the leadership that may be a little bit cautious about allowing a faith-based organization to be introduced to people that are part of their organization. And ultimately, you're not looking, as Evan said, you're not looking for them to market your group. You're instead just hoping to be able to have the ability to access so that they can find out, people can find out that this group is available, and then they can self-select as to whether it's appropriate for them.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as you start to have this conversation with people, and you start to have you're a faith-based person going into kind of a secular space. I feel like the data also shows them, I think, like, what are they really concerned about? What's their root fear? And their root fear is that your number one motive is not wellness or healing. Their root fear is that your number one motive is to come in and evangelize and convert people against their will. That's the fear. That's what they have to be careful of as they start to allow faith-based entities into those government sectors. Is, well, if you're just going to come in here and you're going to proselytize and you're going to try to convert everyone, we can't allow that, because if we let you, then we have to allow all these other faith groups and it becomes a problem and yada, yada, whatever, right? And so I think that outcomes data shows them that our focus is healing, that we are offering healing, and we have not just stories and testimonials and quote-unquote life transformations, which churches love to use the word transformations. Yes, we have that. And we have something that a lot of those don't have, which is a bunch of medical data and journal publications and all sorts of things. And it might even be good if you go into your Leaders Resource section to download some of our papers that have published. We've got papers in various medical journals and health journals and therapy journals that will read like the most boring coffee table book you've ever read, but it checks the box. It checks the box, right? And that's important. Something else, talk about partnering with other first responder related nonprofits in the community. How can that help us work within government entities?
Yeah, especially if they're already on the pre-approved list, then that may be an opportunity to be able to speak with them and to be able to see if there are ways that you can partner with them. That may be something. This may be an area that they operate on a different angle or a different side of, but don't do the same thing that Reboot does. And so why reinvent the wheel? Why not come together and work together as a partnership if you can make it work? That's going to be dependent on each situation, though.
Yeah, and I found, for example, you don't have to host the group doing outreach directly to the first responder community. Maybe you host the group at that nonprofit, that partner nonprofit's facility, and you just serve the people they're already serving by bringing on an additional or a complementary service, as he just said, another slice of the pie to the mix. I mean, some of our best groups, our best partnerships have been with nonprofits that don't share our worldview, but recognize that there's a percentage of the people that they serve who do, right? And that's great, beautiful opportunities for collaboration that we have seen so effective. One of the things that I would add over the years, I can think back, there were so many times where I would have a conversation and just get like a door slammed in my face. You can imagine me walking around at a military base and now even walking into a lot of government buildings talking about first responder works. The first question is, well, are you a cop? Or are you a firefighter? Are you and I say, I'm none of those things, right? I mean, I'm not bringing much street cred to the table, okay? But I have found that despite all of that there are people of peace. In Luke, it talks about find a person of peace and stay there in that house, right? And I have found that over the years, there are these people, these saints who will, they're almost like covert operatives within these entities, within these organizations, who have been feeling a tug at their heart to use some of their faith-based roots to help the people in their community, but they're a little afraid because of their job and if they bring too much. But you will be a welcome sight to them, and they will be a person of peace who they'll help open some doors for you. They'll tell you how to navigate that particular agency. And over the years, there's been so many conversations that I have been rescued from having before they happened by somebody who told me, Evan, hey, you're going to go meet with Joanne. and here's what you need to know about Joanne before the meeting. And I'll go in and I'll say what this person told me to say, and Joanne will go, I'm really glad to hear you say blank because I thought you were going to say blank, but the fact that you're saying blank, we'd like to invite you to come speak. I mean, it's crazy the number of times that's happened. So before you do it, do that prep of finding that person of peace, which can only happen if we're prayerfully praying for that person to exist, but also if we have our antennas up to be able to find that person when they present themselves, right? All right, let me look at our notes. Anything else we've skipped, Scott, on this laundry list of items here, first responder?
The only thing that I was going to mention is hopefully you're watching this in a post-pandemic environment, but don't forget about the possibilities that technology brings to the table in helping to connect with people who might not otherwise be willing to come to a group. I've led 3 of the virtual courses now. First of all, it allows you to connect with people all over the country. You don't have to be all in the same location or the same community, which some people, especially in the first responder world, can feel more comfortable because they may operate on scene or may know all of the people who are in that department, whether it's law enforcement or EMS or fire. They all work together. They all know each other, and maybe they kind of come into that first group and say, I know all of them. I'm out of here. And that can be an issue. The virtual helps in overriding that as a concern. Other folks may not feel comfortable coming to a group, and somehow just having that distance of the screen gives them a little bit more of a sense of calm in being able to speak. And to be able to share. So it's got some challenges associated with it, but don't discount that as a tool and a resource, whether you decide to do the entire course online or whether you decide to just use it as a tool, like we talked about before, to help people catch up on, or people who are going to be out of town or on shift or can't make it that week. They can still participate if you've already got that infrastructure in place.
Yeah. That's good. And as we kind of close out this session, a couple thoughts is, we want to give you the 80-20 rule. 80% try to follow the rules, but 20% make the group work for you. And if you need to make some moderate adaptions and things to make the group work for the people, that's the goal. The goal is healing. The goal is not to cover the material in the exact same way every single time. Yes, we want there to be consistency, 80%, 20%, give flexibility, right? And so that's an okay thing. Give yourself some grace. Now, if I stop by your group someday and I see you doing 80% flexibility and 20% following the rule, I'll be sad. And that'll be that. I probably won't confront you because I'm passive, but I might. You might catch me on a day when I'm riled up about something, right? So I don't fully understand. Scott, I've never fully understood the first responder mindset because let me tell you, here's me. If there's like a really dangerous situation right over here, my reaction is to go run, look for somebody to help, right? A first responder's reaction is to be like, I'm that somebody, let me run towards the fire, let me run towards the danger to go help people. And I think the part that moves me so much about people like you guys who are leading a first responder course is you've made a conscious decision to run towards problems. You've run towards the emotional, the mental, the spiritual traumas that have happened to the people in your group. And you've made a decision to sacrifice your time, to sacrifice the talent, the energy that you have, to sacrifice financially, right? You've made that decision that says, I'm going to stand in the gap. I'm going to run towards this problem to help this person get from where they are today to where they need to be. And I just want to say on behalf of the entire Reboot team and our board of directors, I want you to know we are so, so grateful for you. Because without you, there is no Reboot First Responders. You are the Reboot First Responder team. And as far as the community knows, they will never know who Scott and I are. You will become the face of this movement in your community. And my prayer and hope for you, it's been such a life changer for Scott and I over the years to see how we've helped someone and then they have went and helped someone else. And now there's this daisy chain effect where there's people being helped that we didn't even ever meet. And I pray that's what you're about to experience. I pray that you'll be able to see a time when you walk into a meeting that you thought was going to go terrible and you meet a person of peace and God opens a door, and then you meet a person who was contemplating suicide and nobody knew it, and they went through your course and they say, this course saved my life and now I want to go help the next person up, and now you've just made an influencer because they're going to go tell all their peers, and pretty soon, there was a night I remember one lady brought 13 of her friends with her. 13 people she brought with her to this event. 13. And I pray that you will have that type of experience. And so what I'd like to do, Scott, I'm going to invite you to pray for our first responder leaders specifically. We just want to pray for you as you enter into this journey. We want to pray for your spiritual protection. We want to pray protection of your health and of good boundaries and things like that. But we also want to pray that you'll be able to see the miracles up front, because that's what we really believe, is that you're taking a front row seat in an active, maybe not even front row seat, you're taking an active participation in watching God restore that which seemed unrestorable. So Scott, would you pray for us here as we close out? Thank you.
Heavenly Father, it's such an honor to be in the presence of so many people across this country whose heart is dedicated toward service and who are dedicating so much of their time, their talent, and their treasure toward serving you. And Father, I pray that as we go forward, that each one of them would find encouragement where they need it, that you would provide the resources that they need, both financially, but also the people and the places that they need, so that that Reboot group can get off the ground and can begin to flourish. Father, as they hit the rough parts and the stories, I just pray that you will give them a heart of compassion and to be able to listen even in the struggles. And then, Father, I just pray that they will stay directly connected to you, because you are the ultimate healer. We love you and praise you. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.